Snoop Dogg was just trying to enjoy a leisurely stroll along Long Beach, the sun low in the sky, and a gentle beat playing on his headphones. But as he turned the corner near a small convenience store, he noticed something that killed his vibe instantly. Across the street, a man in a wheelchair was cornered by three teenagers. Their voices were loud, their laughter cruel. They were pushing his chair back and forth, taunting him, as the man tried to protect himself, clearly overwhelmed and unable to escape. Snoop paused, pulling out his headphones, his relaxed attitude morphing into something colder. He had seen a lot in his life, but this was different. I knew I couldn't just walk past. Carlos Snoop wasn't going to handle the situation in anger. He had a better way to shut them up. And they were not prepared for what was coming. The warm California sun was bathing Long Beach in a golden glow, and Snoop Dogg was feeling it. Dressed in a casual tracksuit, his trademark sunglasses resting comfortably on his nose, and his headphones playing soft beats. It was just another quiet afternoon. The breeze brought the aroma of the ocean mixed with the familiar smell of street tacos from a nearby food truck. Life felt easy, just the way Snoop liked it. But everything changed when he turned the corner. The moment she saw the scene unfolding across the street, her vibe changed from relaxed to alert. Three teenagers, no more than 16 years old, were grouped around a man in a wheelchair. Their laughter was loud, mocking, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. One of them abruptly pushed the wheelchair, causing the man to jerk forward, struggling to regain control. His hands were shaking as he tried to protect himself, his face tense with fear and frustration. Snoop pulled out his headphones, the music fading out as the harsh reality of the situation took over. He wasn't one to let disrespect pass, especially not like this. The sun was descending further into the Long Beach sky, casting elongated shadows on the pavement as Snoop Dogg stood still, his gaze fixed on the scene across the street. The warm breeze that moments before had been gently stirring the palm trees now felt different, sharper, as if carrying the weight of what was happening. The teenagers were laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that fills a room with joy. It was malicious, cruel, a sound that cut through the usual buzzing of the neighborhood like a razor. They pushed the man's chair back up, making him stagger forward, and Snoop felt a slow, bubbling heat rise up his chest. The easy pace of his evening walk had vanished. The beats on his headphones had gone into the background, replaced by the rising pulse of something else, justified anger. Snoop pulled out his headphones, the sudden absence of music making the sounds of the street feel louder, more immediate. He didn't rush, he never did. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath and started to cross the street. Each step felt heavy but measured, his classic confident gait rooted in something deeper than style. The soles of his sneakers met the asphalt with a steady rhythm, echoing silent authority that followed him wherever he went. Her tall figure, wrapped in a simple tracksuit, moved with purpose. The sun caught the edge of his gold chain, reflecting a brief flash of light that seemed to cut through the tension in front of him. The boys hadn't noticed it yet. They were too busy with their cruelty, too wrapped up in the false confidence that comes from bullying someone who can't defend himself. But that was about to change. Halfway down the street, Snoop saw him, the moment everything changed. The tallest of the three boys, a thin teenager with shaved hair and a forced smile, looked up and froze in mid-laughter. His eyes opened slightly, recognition dawning like a slow sun. He elbowed his friend, his voice dropping to a whisper that failed to hide the nervous edge. "Hey, that's Snoop Dogg." The other two turned around, their expressions changing from amusement to uncertainty in an instant. For a second, everyone just stared, as if trying to process what they were seeing. Snoop Dogg, the Snoop Dogg, was coming up to them, and he didn't seem to be in the mood for a chat. But Snoop didn't say a word. He let her presence speak for him. There is a kind of power in silence, a weight that fills the space where there used to be noise. The boys felt them immediately. The air seemed to become denser. The sounds of the street died away as Nupa cut the distance. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but the tension in his jaw, the slight downward curve of his mouth, everything spoke for itself. I wasn't there to play. The man in the wheelchair looked up, his eyes meeting Snoop's for a brief moment. There was fear there, but also something else, a glimmer of hope, as if maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Snoop stopped just a few steps away, his tall figure casting a shadow that extended towards the teenagers. The afternoon sun highlighted the sharp lines of his face, the cold exterior barely hiding the heat that boiled inside. The boys shifted uncomfortably, their previous confidence dissolving under the weight of Snoop's silent gaze. The taller one tried to pull himself together, forcing another laugh that sounded more like a cough. But Snoop wasn't laughing. He took off his sunglasses slowly, letting them hang from the collar of his t-shirt. His eyes, usually hidden behind those iconic lenses, were now sharp and focused. There was no way to misunderstand the message in that look, it's over now. The tension was dense enough to be cut off, but Snoop finally let his voice fill the space, soft and steady as a line underneath. What do they think they're doing? It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even strong. But the calmness in her voice carried more weight than any scream could. It was the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are, and letting everyone else find out the hard way. The taller guy straightened up, trying to save his tough guy attitude. We're just kidding, man. It's not a big deal. But Snoop took a step closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. No, he said, his voice dropping even lower. If it's a big deal. The words remained suspended in the air, heavy and undeniable. The boys exchanged glances, their former bravery crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. Snoop let the silence stretch out again, watching them squirm under the weight of their own actions. It wasn't just about scaring them, it was about making them feel the wrongness of what they were doing. Do you think it's funny to pick on someone who can't defend himself? Snoop continued, his voice soft but razor-sharp. Does that make them feel strong? The smaller boy, who had been quiet since the beginning, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes moving nervously between Snoop and the man in the wheelchair. His hands fiddled nervously in the pockets of his sweatshirt, the realization of his mistake sinking in fast. The man in the wheelchair watched the scene unfold, his breathing still ragged but slowing as the tension pulled away from him. Her hands, which had been tightly clenched around the wheels of her chair, began to relax, the fear in her eyes replaced by cautious relief. He didn't say anything. I didn't need to do it. Snoop's presence was speaking for both of us now. The boys were quiet, their eyes fixed on the ground, but Snoop wasn't done yet. Snoop took another slow step forward, his presence filling every inch of the space between them. The real strength, she said, her voice firm and clear. It's not about picking on people who can't defend themselves. It's about lifting people up when they're down, you know what I mean. The taller boy's smile had completely disappeared. He nodded slowly, his tough guy facade shattered under the weight of Snoop's words. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was necessary. It gave the guys time to reflect on their actions, to feel the shame creeping in where there was false confidence before. Snoop finally took a step back, giving them space to make a decision. "Now," he said, his voice still calm but firm, "they can do the right thing, or they can keep acting like fools. But know this, you are not impressing anyone here." The boys stood there for a moment longer, the gravity of the moment settling in. Then, slowly, the taller one took a step forward, looking at Snoop, before turning to the man in the wheelchair. "I'm sorry, man," he muttered, his voice low and unsure. The other two followed him, their apologies mumbled, their eyes never leaving the ground. Snoop nodded, satisfied. It wasn't about humiliating them, it was about making sure they left with a lesson they wouldn't forget. "It's okay," Snoop said, his voice softening a bit. "Now get out of here." The boys did not hesitate. They turned and walked away, their laughter replaced by silence, leaving behind the man they had tried to take down, and the legend who had lifted him up without lifting a finger. The street had fallen silent, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful silence Snoop Dogg was used to. He was the heavy, stuffy guy, the guy who makes even the softest sounds feel louder. The distant hum of a car radio, the soft rustle of palm leaves in the evening breeze, the squeak of a child's bicycle tires coming down the street. Everything seemed to fade into the background as Snoop stood there, just a few steps away from the teenagers. They were frozen, staring at him, their former confidence draining away like water through a cracked cup. Snook did not hurry to fill the silence. He let it hang in the air, dense and uncomfortable, giving the boys enough time to feel the weight of what they had done. The man in the wheelchair remained motionless, his hands clinging tightly to the wheels, his eyes moving nervously between the teenagers and Snoop. There was fear in her expression, but now also something else, a glimmer of hope, a silent question, is this really happening? Snoop finally spoke, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge that cut through the stillness like a knife. "What do they think they are doing?" He did not raise his voice. "I didn't need it." The soft, steady tone struck louder than any scream. It wasn't just a question, it was a statement. A challenge. The taller guy, still trying to maintain some control, forced a laugh. But she was shaky, lacking the arrogance she had before. "We're just kidding, man." "It's no big deal," he said, nervously looking to his friends for support. But there was no support coming in. The other two remained silent, their shoulders tense, their bravado evaporating under Snoop's unflinching gaze. Snoop took a step closer, his presence filling the space like a giant wave. He slowly took off his sunglasses, revealing sharp, penetrating eyes that fixed on the boys like a searchlight exposing a secret. "No," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "If it's a big deal." The words echoed in their heads, louder than the ambient noise from the street. There was no way to misunderstand his message. He wasn't just confronting them, he was showing them a mirror, forcing them to see exactly what they were doing. Snoop's posture was still relaxed, but his eyes told another story. They were firm, unwavering, and filled with a quiet intensity that spoke louder than any words. "I didn't need to brag." Their reputation alone carried enough weight to make these guys question every bad decision they had made that day. "Do you think it's funny to pick on someone who can't defend himself?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through any false confidence they had left. "Does that make them feel strong?" The taller guy's smile completely disappeared, his eyes flashing with something unfamiliar, guilt. The smallest of the three boys shifted uncomfortably, his sneakers scraping against the pavement. He looked at the man in the wheelchair, then back at Snoop, the reality of his actions sinking deeper with each passing second. "I mean, we didn't want to, hurt him or anything," murmured the boy, his voice barely a whisper. Snoop tilted his head slightly, his gaze hardening. "Do you think it doesn't hurt when you treat someone as?" he replied. "It's not about throwing punches, it's about respect. And you don't have any." The man in the wheelchair, emboldened by Snoop's presence, finally spoke up. His voice was calm but firm. "They think they're tough because they know I can't run," he said, his eyes now fixed on the teenagers. "But I bet they wouldn't act like that if it was someone who could stand up." Snook gave him a nod of recognition, his eyes never leaving the boys. "You heard that," Snoop said, his voice still calm. "He is no longer afraid. But you guys, you look pretty scared right now." The taller guy swallowed hard, his throat visibly tightening. The false bravery he had worn like armor had completely cracked, leaving only a frightened teenager standing in front of someone who didn't buy his performance. Snoop let the silence drag on for a moment longer, then took a step back, giving them space to make a decision. "The real strength," Snoop said, his voice dropping even lower, almost as if he was sharing a secret. "It's not about picking on people who can't defend themselves. It's about lifting people up when they're down. That's what makes you a man." The words hit harder than any punch. The boys stood there, their faces pale, their shoulders slumped. The lesson was sinking in, deeper than any punishment could have done. Finally, the taller guy took a step forward, his voice low, his eyes avoiding both Snoop and the man in the wheelchair. "I'm sorry, man," he muttered. The other two followed him, muttering their apologies, their heads bowed in shame. Snoopers felt slowly, satisfied but not arrogant. It wasn't about humiliating them, it was about making sure they understood the weight of their actions. "It's okay," Snoop said, his voice soft but firm. "Now get out of here." The boys did not hesitate. They turned around and walked away, his previous laugh replaced by an awkward, heavy silence that followed him like a shadow. They disappeared down the street, heads down, leaving behind a man who had just been defended by one of the world's most recognizable figures, and a lesson they would carry with them long after the day was over. Snoop watched them leave, his expression calm but thoughtful. Sometimes standing up for someone didn't require fists or fury, just the right words at the right time. And for Snoop Dogg, those words hit harder than any punch. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. The teenagers were there, frozen under Snoop Dogg's piercing gaze, their former bravado fading with every passing second. The street, which was normally filled with the casual bustle of life in Long Beach, felt unusually quiet. The distant sounds of conversations, the occasional horn of a passing car, and the rhythmic squeak of a bicycle chain were all muffled by the weight of the moment. Snoop, standing with his tracksuit, and his sunglasses now hanging from his neck, radiated a calmness that wasn't just a matter of style. It was a matter of control. Her very presence had changed the whole dynamic, but it wasn't over yet. It wasn't just about confronting the boys, it was about changing the narrative for them completely. The taller guy, who had tried to maintain his tough guy facade, was starting to crack. Her eyes moved nervously between Snoop and the man in the wheelchair, not knowing where to look, not knowing what to say. The arrogant smile that had been plastered on his face earlier was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression. that barely concealed his growing discomfort. Snoop saw it. He felt it. But I wasn't going to let them go so easily. He took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, letting each step carry the weight of his words before he even spoke. "You know," Snoop began, his voice soft but with a steely edge, "it's easy to play hard to get when you think no one is looking at you. It's easy to annoy someone you think can't defend themselves." His words remained suspended in the air, heavy and undeniable. The boys moved uncomfortably, the silence pressing down on them like a physical force. "But let me tell you something," Snoop continued, his eyes narrowing just enough to make his point very clear. "The real strength. It's not about making others feel small. It's about making sure people know it's worth something, you know what I mean?" For the first time, the man in the wheelchair spoke. His voice was calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You're right," the man said, his eyes fixed on the boys. "They think they are tough because they chose the easy target. But that's not strength. That's weakness." The boys looked at him, then back at Snoop, the realization sinking deeper with each passing second. The smallest of the three stared at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his sweatshirt pockets. His former confidence now nothing more than a fading memory. Snoop took a deep breath, letting the moment settle before delivering the final blow. "You see, life has a curious way of giving you back what you give," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You treat people like they're worthless, and one day, you'll find yourself on the other side, wondering why no one is there to pick you up." The words reached the heart. The boys stood there, their faces pale, their shoulders slumped, as the weight of their actions crushed them more than any punishment could have. Snoop took a step back slightly, giving them room to make a decision. This was the moment, the crossroads where they could accept what they had done or walk away, carrying the shame with them. The taller guy swallowed hard, his throat visibly tightening, as he finally took a step forward. "Sorry, man," he muttered, his voice low and unsure, directed at the man in the wheelchair. The other two followed him, muttering their apologies without looking anyone in the eye. The weight of the moment was too much to ignore, and they knew it. Snoopa felt slowly, her expression softening enough to let him know that the message had sunk in. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Now get out of here." The boys didn't need to be told twice. They turned around and hurried down the street, their previous laughter replaced by silence. They didn't look back. They didn't have to. The lesson had been learned. Snoop turned his attention back to the man in the wheelchair, who was adjusting his position, still a little upset, but clearly relieved. Her eyes met Snoop's, and for a moment, no words were needed. Gratitude was written on his face. "Is everything okay, brother?" Snoop asked, his tone softening, the edge of the confrontation melting into genuine caring. The man nodded, a small smile breaking the tension that had trapped him earlier. "Yes," he said quietly. "Thanks, man. I didn't know what I was going to do." Snoop gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "It's nothing," he replied, recovering his characteristic relaxed style. "We have to take care of each other here. That's how it should be." The man nodded again, his smile growing a little more, the fear that had clouded his face now replaced by something else, hope. Snoop put his sunglasses back on and started walking down the street, the afternoon sun casting long shadows behind him. The vibe had changed again, but this time, it felt even better than before. He didn't need applause or recognition. The man was safe, and those guys, they would think twice before doing something like that again. Sometimes being the toughest person in the room wasn't about throwing punches. Sometimes it was about standing your ground and telling the truth. And Snoop Dogg, he had been doing that all his life. As the boys' apologies floated in the air, the street seemed to stop, the weight of the moment settling on everyone like a heavy blanket. The anterior noise, the distant hum of traffic, the faint murmur of the nearby corner store, the gentle breeze moving the palm trees. It felt like a background noise in a scene that had gone from chaos to clarity. The man in the wheelchair adjusted his position, his hands still shaking slightly as he processed what had just happened. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. The fear that had gripped him before was fading away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude. Snoop Dogg was there, his presence still imposing, but his eyes had softened. The edge of confrontation had been replaced by something calmer, more entered. Not only was he pleased the boys had left, he was making sure the man knew he wasn't alone. Snoop turned all his attention to the man in the wheelchair, giving him a nod that said a lot without a single word. It wasn't just a gesture of respect, it was recognition. Snoop knew that standing up to bullies required a different kind of courage, especially when you were vulnerable. "Is everything okay, brother?" Snoop asked, his voice lower now, softer but still carrying that constant weight. The man looked up, his eyes meeting Snoop's, and for a second, he just nodded, unable to find the words. Then, as the adrenaline wore off, he finally spoke. Yes, I'm fine now," he said, his voice shaky but sincere. "Thanks, man. I didn't know what I was going to do." Snoop crouched slightly, staying at the man's eye level. His face, usually hidden behind sunglasses and a relaxed smile, was open and sincere. "It's nothing," he said quietly. "We have to take care of each other here. That's how it should be." The man nodded, his eyes shining slightly, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, gratitude, relief, and the recognition that sometimes, even in the middle of a city, there were still people who cared. As Snoop helped adjust the man's wheelchair, some passers-by who had been watching from a distance began to relax. A woman across the street gave Snoop a subtle nod, her eyes reflecting the same respect the man felt. A couple of teenagers, who had seen everything from their bicycles, exchanged silent glances, clearly affected by what they had witnessed. It wasn't just about the man in the wheelchair or even the bullies, it was about everyone who saw that defending someone didn't always have to be loud or violent. Sometimes, it was about being present, being assertive, and letting people know they weren't invisible. Snook stood up, his gaze scanning the street for a moment, absorbing the calm after the storm. He had dealt with all kinds of situations in his life, from the chaos of the music industry to personal struggles, but this was about something simpler, something purer. It was about respect, of humanity, and making sure people knew what they mattered. Before Snoop could walk away, the man called out to him, his voice firmer now. "Hey, Snoop," he said, a little smile peeking out at the corners of his mouth. "You didn't have to do that, but I'm glad you did." Snoop turned around, a smile of his own tugging at his lips. "Sometimes you have to do something," he replied. "Especially when no one else will." Snoop put the sunglasses back on, regaining his characteristic coolness. But this wasn't about style, it was about closing a chapter, knowing that I had done what needed to be done. As he started to walk down the street, his steps light but determined, the sun casting long shadows behind him, he felt a quiet satisfaction to sit on his chest. I didn't need applause. I didn't need anyone to know what had just happened. The man was safe, and those guys, they would carry that lesson with them longer than they realized. As Nuck disappeared down the street, the impact of his actions lingered. The man in the wheelchair watched him walk away, a new confidence settling into his posture. The bystanders who had witnessed the scene would carry that moment with them. A reminder that standing up for someone didn't always require fists, it required presence, and somewhere along the way, those three guys would remember the day they messed with the wrong man, not because he was famous, but because he showed them what true strength looked like. Snoop Dogg continued his walk, the rhythm in his headphones picking up as he put them back on. The city was buzzing around him, life returning to its usual rhythm, but something was different now. Not in a big or dramatic way, but in that small, quiet way that matters most. Because sometimes, the biggest changes happen in the smallest moments. For Snoop, it wasn't about making headlines or gaining recognition. It was about doing the right thing when it really mattered. And as he walked away in the golden glow of the evening in Long Beach, he knew one thing for sure. Sometimes being the strongest person in the room isn't about how loud you scream or how hard you hit. Sometimes, it's about how you present yourself. And Snoop Dogg, he had been performing his whole life. As Snoop Dogg walked away, the usual rhythm of the city slowly returned, but for those who had witnessed the scene, something was left in the air. The man in the wheelchair now sat a little more upright, his fear replaced by a calm confidence. On the other side of the street, the people who had stopped to watch began to move again, but with respectful glances in Snoop's direction. The teenagers who had caused the problem were long gone, but the lesson they had learned would stay with them. It wasn't just about being confronted by a celebrity, it was about realizing how wrong they were, and how easy it was to make a different decision. Snoop didn't look back. I didn't need to do it. She knew that her presence had made a difference, not only for the man she helped, but for everyone who saw how a moment of kindness and strength could change the course of someone's day. When Snoop rounded the corner, putting his headphones back on, the smooth beat continued right where he'd left off. But something about the vibe felt even better now. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about knowing that he had done the right thing, even when no one asked him to. Because sometimes, the strength is not in how loud you scream or how hard you fight.